The desert sun was a fading orange memory as the black SUV sped away from the glamorous resort. Inside, Mike Tyson sat in silence, the gentle hum of the engine the only sound. He felt the familiar, pleasant exhaustion that followed a successful appearance. Tonight had been good. The crowd had been electric, hanging on his every word as he spoke about his life, his fights, his mistakes, and his hard-won peace. The thunderous applause at the end wasn't for the fearsome boxer of old, but for the man he had become. It was a feeling he still wasn't entirely used to, but one he deeply appreciated. He was headed not to a commercial airport with its bright lights and bustling crowds, but to a smaller, quieter private airfield on the city's edge. This was his world now, a world of streamlined travel and quiet efficiency. The SUV glided through security gates without stopping, rolling directly onto the tarmac where a sleek, white private jet stood waiting under the cool glow of perimeter lights. It was a beautiful machine, all curves and power, a symbol of a life lived at the highest level. A member of the ground crew, dressed in a crisp uniform, opened the SUV door with a polite, "Welcome, Mr. Tyson. Everything is ready for you." Mike gave a small, tired nod and climbed out, the evening air crisp against his skin. He carried only a small bag. He moved with a deliberate, heavy grace up the short set of stairs and into the cabin. The inside of the jet was a capsule of quiet luxury. Plush, cream-colored seats that looked more like living room armchairs, polished walnut trim, and soft, ambient lighting. It smelled of clean leather and fresh coffee. The only other person there was a young flight attendant who offered a warm, professional smile. "Good evening, sir. My name is Chloe. We're honored to have you with us. Can I get you anything to start? Water, juice, perhaps something stronger?" "Just some water, thank you," Mike said, his voice a low rumble. He preferred the quiet. "Of course. Your usual seat is prepared," she said, gesturing to the prime spot on the aircraft. A forward-facing seat with extraordinary legroom, next to a large window and easy access to the aisle. It was the best seat on the plane, the one reserved for the most important client on the flight, which, as far as he knew, was him. He had specifically booked it, as he always did. His large frame needed the space, and after a long day, he valued the comfort. He settled in, the seat embracing him comfortably. He stowed his bag, took the bottle of chilled water from Chloe with a quiet thanks, and pulled out his noise-canceling headphones. He scrolled through a playlist on his phone, selecting some soft, instrumental jazz. He placed the headphones over his ears, the outside world dissolving into a gentle melody. He leaned his head against the cool window, watching the ground crew make their final checks under the tarmac lights. He was ready to be home. Perhaps 20 minutes later, he felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The cabin door opened again, letting in a brief rush of night air and new voices. Mike, immersed in his music, only half noticed. He saw a man enter from the corner of his eye. The passenger was white, in his 50s, dressed in an obviously expensive suit that spoke of boardrooms and private clubs. He had an air of impatience about him, checking a gleaming watch as he nodded to the flight attendant. The man's eyes quickly scanned the cabin, landing on Mike, then on Mike's seat, then flicking away. Chloe, the attendant, greeted the new passenger. Her voice, though polite, carried a slightly higher, more deferential tone. "Sir, welcome aboard. We are so pleased to have you. May I take your coat?" The man handed over his coat without a word, his attention still on the seating. He spoke quietly to Chloe, but his gestures were clear. He pointed toward the front of the cabin, toward Mike's seat. Chloe's smile became fixed. She nodded, looking suddenly unsure. She glanced quickly at Mike, who was peacefully looking out the window, then back to the new passenger. She gave a small, nervous nod and turned. Mike saw her approach in his peripheral vision. He slowly pulled one ear of his headphones off, letting it rest on his shoulder, the soft jazz still playing in the other. Chloe stood in the aisle beside him, her hands clasped tightly together. "Mr. Tyson," she began, her voice sweet but strained. "I do apologize for the interruption." Mike turned his head to look at her, saying nothing. His gaze was neutral, patient. "There's been a small situation with the seating assignments," she continued, forcing the smile to stay on her face. "We have another very valued client on board tonight, and it seems there was an oversight in the booking system." Mike just waited. He had heard many versions of many stories over the years. He knew how to listen. "The thing is," Chloe pressed on, "his preferred seat, the one he always flies in, appears to be this one. The system double-booked it. It's a terrible error, and we are so very sorry for the inconvenience." She paused, hoping he would simply agree. When he didn't, she delivered the request. "Would it be at all possible for you to switch seats? We have another very comfortable spot just here at the back." She gestured toward the rear of the cabin, where the seats were noticeably smaller, closer together, and had less window space. It was a standard seat, a passenger seat, not the VIP throne he was currently in. Mike let the silence hang for a beat. He looked from her anxious face to the new passenger, who was now pointedly looking at his phone, pretending not to watch the exchange. Mike then looked back to the flight attendant. "Where is your team leader?" Mike asked, his voice calm but leaving no room for debate. He didn't want to debate the young attendant. He wanted the person in charge. Chloe's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, of course." "One moment." She seemed almost relieved to pass the responsibility. She hurried forward to the cockpit area and returned a moment later with an older man, the flight's lead attendant. He had a practiced, corporate-friendly demeanor, a man used to managing wealthy egos. He introduced himself with a smooth, confident handshake that Mike didn't return, forcing the man to awkwardly pull his hand back. "Sir, my apologies." Chloe explained the mix-up. "I'm sure," the lead attendant said, his tone implying it was a minor, silly thing they could all solve like adults. "We truly appreciate your understanding. These digital systems, they cause more trouble than they're worth. If you wouldn't mind just moving your belongings, we can get you settled in the back and get this flight underway for everyone." The wording was careful, but the pressure was clear. For everyone. The implication was that Mike was now holding up the flight, being difficult. The other passenger was the valued client. Mike was the problem to be managed. Mike leaned back in his seat. He took the headphone off his other ear, letting them both hang around his neck. The quiet jazz now sounded tinny and distant. He looked the lead attendant directly in the eyes. "Let me understand this," Mike said, his words slow and clear like measured taps on a drum. "You want me to get out of the seat I booked, the seat I paid for, and move to a worse seat?" For him, he didn't gesture. He didn't need to. "It's not a matter of for him, sir," the lead attendant corrected smoothly, though a flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "It's about rectifying the booking error. He is a long-time, top-tier member of our service. He has certain expectations." Mike absorbed that. The pieces clicked into place. The other man's impatience, the attendant's deferential tone, the immediate assumption that Mike would be the one to move. It wasn't about a computer glitch. It was about a hierarchy. And in that moment, in the eyes of this crew, Mike Tyson was lower on that hierarchy. A cold, still feeling settled over him. It wasn't the hot, blinding rage of his youth. This was different. This was a deep, profound disappointment and a crystal-clear recognition of what was happening. He felt the eyes of the other passenger on him, waiting for the famous, volatile Mike Tyson to either explode or submit, But Mike did neither. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He looked at the lead attendant, his expression unreadable. "Okay," Mike said, his voice a low, calm rumble that seemed to vibrate in the quiet cabin. "Let me make a call." The air in the cabin, which had been cool and refreshed, now felt thick and heavy. The low hum of the jet's systems, usually unnoticed, seemed to grow louder in the silence. The lead flight attendant stood frozen in the aisle, his professional smile slipping into a look of confused concern. He hadn't expected this. He'd expected grumbling, maybe a request for compensation, but not this quiet, deliberate response. Not a phone call. Mike Tyson didn't look at the man anymore. His focus was entirely on the sleek phone in his large hand. His thumbs moved over the screen with a surprising gentleness. He wasn't scrolling angrily or stabbing at numbers. He was searching for a specific contact, his face a mask of intense concentration. The soft light from the screen illuminated the famous tattoos on his face. But his expression was unreadable, not angry. Not sad, just utterly still. The other passenger, the man in the expensive suit, finally put his own phone down. He watched from a few feet away, his earlier impatience now mixed with a flicker of curiosity and unease. He'd seen Mike Tyson on television for decades. He'd heard the stories. This quiet-seated figure wasn't matching the expectation. There was a power in his stillness that was somehow more intimidating than any shout. The young flight attendant, Chloe, had taken a small step back, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She looked from her boss to the famous passenger and back, a sick feeling growing in her stomach. This was going wrong. This was going very wrong. Mike found the number. It wasn't labeled with a company name or a title. It was just a name, the first name of the founder and majority owner of the entire private jet service. This wasn't a call to customer service. This was a direct line to the very top, to a man who counted Mike not just as a client, but as a friend. They moved in the same rarefied circles, had shared meals, had a genuine respect for each other's journeys from tough beginnings to incredible success. He tapped the screen and put the phone to his ear. The ringing was faint, but in the silent cabin, it seemed to echo. One ring, two. The lead attendant found his voice again, a weaker version of his earlier confidence. "Sir, there's really no need for that. We can resolve this right here. Unsure we can offer you some travel credit for the inconvenience." His words trailed off as Mike raised his index finger, just an inch, a simple gesture that commanded absolute silence. The man's mouth closed. A voice answered on the other end of the line, a cheerful, booming voice that Mike could faintly hear. The owner was clearly somewhere nice, maybe at a dinner or at home with his family. "Mike, to what do I owe the pleasure? You better not be canceling on our golf game next week." Mike's expression didn't change. "Hey," he said, his voice flat. "I'm on your plane right now. Your jet. The one with the tail number ending in 7. "Oh, excellent. Everything smooth?" the owner asked, his tone still bright. "Not really," Mike said. He took a slow breath. He wasn't yelling. He was just stating facts, like he was reading from a report. "I boarded. I'm in my seat. The seat I booked. Then another gentleman got on. Your crew, your flight attendant in charge, he comes to me and tells me there's been a booking mistake. He asks me no. He tells me to get up and move to a smaller seat in the back, so this other gentleman can have my seat." There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. The cheerful noise was gone. "He what?" The owner's voice was suddenly clear, sharp, and cold. "He said the other man is a top-tier member, that he has certain expectations, that it's about fixing a computer error." Mike's eyes lifted and met the lead attendant's. The man had gone pale. He could hear the tinny, angry voice coming from the phone. He recognized the voice. His blood ran cold. Where is he now? The crew lead? The owner asked, each word clipped. He's standing right in front of me, Mike said, holding the attendant's terrified gaze. Put him on the phone. Right now. Mike didn't smile. He simply held the phone out toward the attendant. His hand was perfectly steady. He wants to talk to you. For a second, the attendant just stared at the phone like it was a live snake. His mind was racing. This couldn't be happening. It was a simple seat swap. A routine request to prioritize a high-value client. How did it lead to this? With a trembling hand, he reached out and took the phone. He brought it to his ear. "Hello?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. What followed was a conversation the attendant would never forget, though he would wish he could. He didn't get to explain. He didn't get to justify. The voice on the other end was not yelling. It was worse. It was the quiet, furious, disgusted tone of a man who had built an empire on discretion and impeccable service, and who had just learned that his empire was being undermined by the very people he paid to uphold it. "Who do you think you are?" The owner began, his voice low and dangerous. "Do you have any idea who that man is? Not as a boxer. As a client. As my friend?" The attendant tried to speak. "Sir, there was a system error. We were just trying to—" "I don't care about your system." The owner cut him off, the volume rising slightly. "Your job is not to decide which client is more important. Your job is to serve every client on that aircraft with the same absolute respect. You do not, under any circumstances, ask a client who is already seated to move for another client. Ever. Do you understand the message you just sent? Do you have any clue?" The attendant's mouth was dry. He looked at the floor, unable to face Mike or the other passenger. I understand, sir." It was a judgment error. A judgment error? The owner's laugh was harsh and mirthless. "It's a firing offense. It's a violation of everything this company stands for. You embarrassed my friend. You embarrassed me. You think this is about a seat? This is about integrity. Now you listen to me. You will get this flight in the air. You will not speak another word to Mr. Tyson unless he speaks to you first. You will provide him with whatever he wants. And when this plane lands, you and your entire crew will report to the operations office. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," the attendant whispered, defeated. "Give the phone back to Mike." The attendant, his hand shaking violently now, handed the phone back to Mike. He couldn't meet his eyes. He just turned and walked stiffly toward the front galley, his shoulders slumped, a broken man. Mike put the phone back to his ear. "Yeah, Mike, I am so sorry," the owner said, and he genuinely sounded it. The fury was gone, replaced by sincere regret. "That should never have happened. Not on my watch. You have my word. This will be handled." "Thank you," Mike said simply. There was no gloating in his tone. No victory. Just a quiet acceptance of the apology. "Enjoy your flight. I'll be dealing with this personally." They hung up. Mike placed the phone on his lap. He looked out the window again. The ground crew had finished up. The jetway was pulling away. He slowly put his headphones back on, but he didn't start the music. He just sat there, listening to the silence inside his own head. The lead attendant reappeared, looking like a ghost. He walked over to the other passenger, the man in the suit. He spoke in a hushed, urgent tone. "Sir, I am so sorry for the confusion. We have your regular seat prepared for you right here." He gestured to a different, perfectly good seat, just across the aisle. It wasn't Mike's seat. It was another VIP seat, but not the one. The suited man looked stunned. He opened his mouth to protest, then looked at Mike's broad, still back, the headphones on. He thought about the phone call he'd just witnessed. He thought about the look of sheer terror on the attendant's face. He simply nodded, picked up his briefcase, and sat where he was told. The young attendant, Chloe, moved through the cabin like a robot, completing the safety briefing without really seeing the passengers. Her face was flushed with shame. A few minutes later, the engines whined to a higher pitch, and the jet began to roll smoothly toward the runway. Mike finally started his music. The soft jazz filled his ears, but the peace of the evening was gone. He wasn't angry at the men on the plane. They were small people, following a small-minded script. He just felt tired. Tired of having to prove, over and over again, that he belonged in the seat he earned. As the jet lifted into the dark sky, the lead attendant sat strapped into his jump seat by the galley, staring at the wall. The owner's words echoed in his mind. Asterisk, when this plane lands. He knew his career, his very comfortable career in the world of private aviation, was over. And he knew, with a sickening certainty, that he had no one to blame but himself. The jet soared through the night, a speck of light in a vast black sky. Inside, the cabin was a tomb of quiet tension. The soft whine of the engines was the only constant sound. The usual gentle clinking of glasses or rustle of a newspaper was absent. Everyone was locked in their own thoughts, and none of them were good. Mike Tyson kept his headphones on, his gaze fixed on the window. But he wasn't seeing the cloud layer below or the distant stars. He was seeing the look on the lead attendant's face when he realized who was on the other end of the phone. It wasn't a satisfying image. It just felt hollow. The initial sting of the disrespect had faded, replaced by a dull, heavy feeling. It was a familiar weight. A lifetime of people making quick judgments, seeing the tattoos and the legend before seeing the man. He thought that weight would get lighter with time and success. Sometimes it just got heavier in different ways. Across the aisle, the other passenger sat stiffly in his seat. The air of impatient importance was gone, evaporated. He stared straight ahead at the polished wood of the forward bulkhead, his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm on his knee. He was a man used to getting his way, used to systems bending for him. He had fully expected the famous boxer to be the one to bend. That was the natural order in his world. The phone call had shattered that order. He'd heard the fury in the muffled voice from the phone. He understood power, and in that moment, he realized he had vastly misjudged where the real power sat on this aircraft. He felt no guilt, only a sharp, uncomfortable awareness that he had been a spectator to his own social miscalculation. He dared not order a drink for fear of drawing any attention to himself. Up in the galley, the two flight attendants moved like ghosts. The lead attendant, a man who had prided himself on 20 years of flawless service to the ultra-wealthy, was crumbling inside. His hands trembled slightly as he arranged bottles of water in a small fridge. The owner's words played on a loop in his head. Asterisk, a firing offense. You embarrassed me. Report to the operations office. He thought of his mortgage, his daughter's private school tuition, the lifestyle his job afforded. It was all evaporating because of one decision, one moment of choosing who he thought was the right client. He had seen Mike Tyson as just another celebrity, perhaps a difficult one. He had not seen him as a pillar of the very community he served. The mistake was so profound he could barely breathe. The younger attendant, Chloe, was scrubbing a spotless countertop over and over with a cloth. Her face was hot with a mixture of shame and fear. She had been the first to deliver the request. She had used that sweet, placating tone, the one she used to gently manage passengers. She replayed her own words. Asterisk, we have another very valued client. She had meant the man in the suit. The implication now screamed in her memory. She had, without even thinking, labeled Mike Tyson as less valued. She was just following her boss's lead, But that excuse felt pathetic now. She thought about how kind Mike Tyson had been when he first boarded, his quiet "thank you" for the water. He hadn't been demanding or rude, and she had helped ask him to move. The guilt was a physical ache in her chest. That asterisk, 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 30,000 feet below and several hundred miles away. In a spacious home office that overlooked a glittering city skyline, the owner of the jet service was not enjoying his evening. He sat in a large leather chair, the phone still in his hand, but the screen was dark. The pleasant dinner with his family was a distant memory, ruined by the cold fury that still coursed through him. This wasn't about a seat. It was about the foundation of his business. He had built his company from a single plane into a global brand on two promises: absolute privacy and impeccable, equal service. Billionaires, celebrities, royalty, they all came to him because they knew the rules were the same for everyone. No politics, no favoritism, just quiet, flawless execution. His clients trusted him with their safety, their schedules, and their dignity, and one of his most senior crews had just stomped all over that trust. They had tried to create a hierarchy on his airplane. They had singled out Mike Tyson, a man he respected immensely, and asked him to surrender his paid seat. The sheer, staggering lack of judgment made his head hurt. He picked up his phone again, but this time he called his head of global operations, a woman known for her no-nonsense efficiency and fierce loyalty to the company's standards. She answered on the second ring, her voice alert despite the late hour. "We have a critical incident," the owner said, dispensing with any greeting. His voice was like granite. "Jet 7, currently in flight from the desert hub to the coast. I need everything. I want the cockpit voice recorder transcript from the moment the passengers boarded. I want the crew manifest and the full client booking file for this flight. I want to know who made the seat assignment decision. I want it all on my screen in 20 minutes. The head of operations didn't ask why. The tone in her boss's voice told her everything. "Right away" was all she said. Within 15 minutes. The owner's computer screen was alive with documents and audio files. He put on a pair of reading glasses and started with the booking file. It was clear as day. Mike Tyson, VIP Seat 1A, booked and confirmed 72 hours prior. The other passenger, a finance executive, was booked for VIP Seat 2A across the aisle. There was no system error. The seats were different. The only error was human. Then he opened the audio file from the cabin. He took a deep breath and pressed play. He heard the ambient sounds of the cabin. He heard the young attendant's friendly greeting to Mike. He heard the calm in Mike's voice. Then came the arrival of the second passenger. The owner's jaw tightened as he heard the change in the young attendant's tone, sweeter, higher, more eager to please. He listened to the muffled conversation between her and the other passenger, then her footsteps as she approached Mike. He heard every word of the exchange. The small situation, the oversight in the booking system, the other very valued client. He heard his lead attendant's smooth, dismissive voice calling it a mix-up, the patronizing mention of digital systems, the clear pressure to get this flight underway for everyone. But it was Mike's words that hit him the hardest. The calm, deadly clear question. Asterisk, you want me to get out of the seat I booked, the seat I paid for, and move to a worse seat. For him. And then his lead attendant's reply, the one that sealed his fate. It's not a matter of for him, sir. It's about rectifying a booking error. He is a long-time, top-tier member of our service. He has certain expectations. Asterisk, the owner stopped the audio. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment. There it was. The cancer in his company. His employee had explicitly stated that one client's status and expectations outweighed another client's confirmed booking. He had invented a problem to solve a problem that didn't exist, and in doing so, he had shown his hand. He had revealed a bias, an unspoken ranking system that had no place on his aircraft. He thought about Mike, sitting there, being told this. A man who had faced down the world's most terrifying fighters in front of millions, now being condescended to by a man in a uniform over a leather seat. The humiliation of it, the pettiness, made the owner's blood boil. He called his head of operations back. "Have you listened?" "I have," she said, her voice tight with anger. "It's indefensible." "It's more than indefensible," the owner corrected. "It is a direct violation of our core ethics." That lead attendant didn't make a mistake. He made a choice. He chose who he thought was more important. He treated Mike Tyson like a second-class passenger. That choice tells me he is incapable of representing this brand. He cannot be trusted with our clients. He paused, thinking of the young attendant who had delivered the initial request. She was following orders, but she had also used the language of bias. She needed to be held accountable, but her fate was less clear. When that plane lands, the owner continued, his decision final. The entire crew is suspended. The lead attendant is to be terminated immediately for gross misconduct and violation of client dignity protocols. We will review the other attendant's record. The other passenger on the manifest is to be flagged. We will be having a conversation with his firm about his conduct." "Understood," the head of operations said. "And Mr. Tyson?" "A formal, private apology from me personally, and a review of all our training protocols, starting tomorrow. I want every crew member, worldwide, to understand that this will never happen again. Not on my planes." He hung up and looked back out at the city lights. The jet, somewhere in the night sky, was carrying a problem he had just resolved. But the work was just beginning. He had to cut out the sickness to save the body of his company. And it started the moment the wheels touched the ground. The jet began its descent, the change in pressure, a subtle pop in the ears. For the passengers, it was a normal sensation, a sign of a journey ending. For the crew, it felt like a countdown to an execution. The lead attendant had not spoken a word since the phone call. He performed the landing preparations by rote, his movements slow and heavy, like a man walking through deep water. He avoided looking anywhere near seat 1A. The young attendant, Chloe, moved through the cabin collecting empty glasses with a fixed, hollow smile that didn't reach her eyes. She offered Mike Tyson a bottle of water for landing. He simply shook his head, a small, quiet motion. She flinched as if he'd shouted at her. The other passenger had spent the flight pretending to work on a laptop, but the screen had long since gone dark from inactivity. He was a man who was used to being in control, and for the last hour, he had felt utterly powerless. The silent judgment in the cabin was a thick fog. He just wanted to get off the plane. Mike felt the wheels unlock beneath him. He watched the runway lights rush up, streaks of white against the tarmac. He felt the gentle bump, the roar of reverse thrust. Another city, another arrival. But this one felt different. The peace he usually found in the solitude of travel was absent. He was just tired Dot as the jet taxied toward a private hangar. Far from the main terminal, the lead attendant's personal phone, stowed in the galley, buzzed once. A text message. He didn't need to look to know what it said. It would be from the operations manager. A meeting point. He felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. The aircraft came to a smooth stop. The engines whined down into silence. For a moment, there was perfect quiet. Then the lead attendant, forcing his professional persona back on like an ill-fitting suit, made the standard announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Please remain seated until the aircraft is fully secured." The door was opened from the outside by a ground agent. The usual warm, humid night air rushed in, but it brought no relief. The lead attendant stood by the door, his face a pale mask. "Thank you for flying with us," he said, the words ash in his mouth. The other passenger practically bolted from his seat, grabbing his briefcase and coat. He mumbled a thank you without making eye contact and disappeared down the stairs. Melting into the darkness of the tarmac, where a waiting car's lights flashed, Mike stood up, unfolding his large frame. He retrieved his small bag from the overhead. He walked to the door. As he passed the lead attendant, the man could not help but look up. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Mike's gaze was not angry. It was empty, like a calm sea after a storm has passed. There was no satisfaction there, no gloating. Just a final, quiet acknowledgement of what had transpired. Then Mike Tyson nodded once, a tiny, almost imperceptible dip of his head, and walked down the stairs. That nod broke the lead attendant more than any curse could have. It was a dismissal. It was an end. A company van was waiting for Mike. Not the usual sleek car, but a plain van. The driver, a different ground staff member, was unusually formal. "Mr. Tyson, my deepest apologies for tonight. The CEO has arranged separate transport for you directly to your destination. It's just through here." His tone was one of profound respect and caution. Mike got in. The van drove the short distance across the apron to where a different, even more luxurious car was idling, a personal assistant from the jet service company standing beside it. Another round of apologies, another assurance that the CEO was handling it personally. Mike accepted it all with silent grace. He got into the car and was driven away, leaving the hangar behind. Back on the plane, the two attendants began their shutdown duties in silence. They knew the drill. But tonight, the routine felt like a funeral rite. They were just finishing when they saw two figures walking across the tarmac toward the aircraft. One was the head of global operations, a woman known for her sharp suits and sharper eyes. The other was the local base manager, a man who looked deeply uncomfortable. The lead attendant's heart sank into his shoes. Chloe felt hers begin to race, a panicked flutter in her chest. The head of operations climbed the stairs and entered the cabin. She didn't greet them. She simply looked around, her expression unreadable. "Is the aircraft secure? Are the passengers off?" "Yes, ma'am," the lead attendant said, his voice thin. "Good. Gather your personal items. Both of you. You're to come with us to the operations office immediately." The walk from the hangar to the brightly lit office building felt like the longest walk of their lives. They moved in a small, grim procession. The late-night staff in the hallways avoided looking at them. Sensing the gravity in the air, the operations office was a sterile room with a large table and monitors showing flight paths. The head of operations took a seat at the head of the table. The base manager stood near the door, as if wanting to be anywhere else. "Sit," she said to the two attendants. They sat. She placed a small digital recorder on the table. "For the record," she stated flatly. Then she looked first at the lead attendant. "You were the crew lead on Jet 7 this evening." "Yes." "You initiated a request for a seated client. Mr. Tyson, to vacate his confirmed, paid for VIP seat to accommodate another client." He wanted to explain, to talk about the perceived status, the pressure. But the words from the audio recording echoed in his mind. He knew there was no defense. "I presented the request, yes. You stated to the client that the other passenger was a long-time top-tier member with certain expectations. Did you say that?" He swallowed. "I did." The head of operations turned her gaze to the young attendant. "And you delivered the initial request. You used the phrase 'another very valued client' in reference to the passenger who had just boarded, correct?" Chloe's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back fiercely. "Yes, I was following my supervisor's instruction." "You were," the head of operations acknowledged, her tone not softening. But the language you chose, the tone you used, contributed to a clear and unacceptable message that one client was more valued than another on our aircraft. She leaned forward, placing her hands on the table. What you both failed to understand or chose to ignore is the fundamental principle of this company. We do not have tiers of dignity. A booked seat is a contract. A client is a client. You do not judge their worth. You serve them. By attempting to move a client based on your own perceived hierarchy, you violated that client's dignity, and you violated the trust that every other client places in us. She let that hang in the air. The lead attendant stared at his hands in his lap. The decision from the CEO is final, she continued. For you, she said to the lead attendant, this constitutes gross misconduct and a fundamental breach of your duties. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. You will surrender your company credentials, your uniforms, and any company property. Security will escort you from the premises. The words were like physical blows. Even though he expected them, hearing them aloud made his world tilt. 20 years, gone, just like that. He looked up, a last spark of desperation in his eyes. Is there no appeal? No review? The CEO reviewed the audio personally, the head of operations said, her voice cold. Your own words are the only review necessary. There is no appeal. She then turned to Chloe. The young woman braced herself. Your actions, while following instruction, displayed a critical lack of judgment and a failure to uphold our service standards. You are suspended without pay, pending a full review of your training records and past performance. You will also surrender your credentials tonight. You will be contacted within the week regarding the final decision on your employment. Suspended. Not fired, but in limbo. It was a small mercy, but it felt like a death sentence for her career. She nodded mutely, tears finally spilling over. The head of operations stood up. This meeting is concluded. The base manager will oversee the return of company property. I suggest you both consider the profound lack of professionalism you displayed tonight. It has cost you dearly. With that, she picked up her recorder and left the room, her heels clicking decisively on the linoleum floor. What followed was a humiliating blur. Handing over their ID badges, their crew passes, the electronic tablets they used for manifests. The lead attendant changed out of his uniform in a locker room, putting on the casual clothes he'd arrived in that morning, a lifetime ago. A security guard waited for him outside. He was walked, not as an employee, but as an intruder, to the perimeter gate and led out onto the quiet service road. He stood there for a moment under a flickering streetlight, a man in jeans and a polo shirt, his career in a duffel bag at his feet. Chloe's walkout was quieter, but no less painful. The base manager, a kind man, said softly, I'm sorry it came to this. Go home. Wait for the call. She got into her own car, the uniform blouse she was still wearing, feeling like a costume she had no right to wear. She started the engine and cried, great heaving sobs of shame and fear. Alone in the dark parking lot back in the office, the head of operations made her final call of the night. She dialed the CEO. It's done, she said. Good, the owner replied, his voice tired. Now we begin the real work. We make sure no one on my fleet ever forgets what happened tonight. The week that followed was quiet on the surface, but beneath it, a fundamental change was taking root. The story of what happened on Jet 7 didn't make the tabloids or the evening news. In the world of private aviation, the most important stories are often the ones that never become public. They are handled in hushed tones in corporate offices and in the quiet corners at exclusive lounges. For Mike Tyson, life moved on. He did interviews, trained, spent time with his family. But the memory of that flight didn't entirely leave him. It wasn't the main thing on his mind, but it was there, a small, dark pebble in his shoe. He thought about it not with anger, but with a weary understanding. He had lived a life in the public eye, a life where people were always making assumptions. This was just another version of that old song. The phone call hadn't been about vengeance. It had been about drawing a line. A simple statement. Asterisk, I see what you're doing, and it's not okay. Asterisk, a few days after the incident, a handwritten letter arrived at his office, delivered by a special courier. The paper was thick and expensive. The handwriting was bold and clear. It was from the owner of the jet service. Asterisk Mike. Asterisk, asterisk, I am writing this because a phone call doesn't feel like enough. What happened on my aircraft was a profound failure, and I own it. You have been a friend and a loyal client for years, and to have your dignity disrespected by my team is something I will not forgive myself for easily. The individuals involved are no longer with the company, but more importantly, we are making sure the mindset that led to their actions is rooted out. Our clients trust us with more than their travel. They trust us with their respect. We betrayed that trust. I hope in time you can give us a chance to earn it back. My door is always open. Asterisk, asterisk, your friend. Asterisk Mike read it twice and placed it in a drawer. It was a good letter. It felt real. He appreciated that the man didn't make excuses. He talked about dignity. That was the word that mattered. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk across the country. In a corporate training center attached to a major airport, a mandatory meeting was taking place. Every flight attendant, crew lead, and operations manager for the jet service in the region was present. The room was packed, buzzing with low, anxious conversation. The rumor mill had been working overtime. Everyone had heard a version of the story. A crew was fired after a problem with a famous passenger. The details were fuzzy, but the consequence was crystal clear. The head of global operations walked to the front of the room. She didn't use a podium. She just stood there, letting the room fall silent. For those of you who haven't heard the specifics, she began, her voice carrying easily. Last week on Jet 7, a crew asked a client who was already seated in his booked VIP seat to move to a lesser seat. They did this to accommodate another client they perceived to be more important. The client they asked to move was Mike Tyson. A soft ripple went through the room. Some people looked down. Others exchanged glances. The CEO received a call from Mr. Tyson on that flight, she continued. He listened to the audio of the exchange, and then he terminated the employment of the crew lead and suspended the attending flight attendant. It was not a negotiation. It was the fastest termination decision I have seen in my career. She let that sink in. The room was utterly still now. I want to be very clear about why, she said. It was not because Mike Tyson is a celebrity. If it had been any other client, a retired teacher flying to see a grandchild, an entrepreneur on a first big deal, anyone, the result would have been the same. This is not about fame. This is about a principle. She clicked a remote, and a single sentence appeared on the screen, behind her in bold letters. A booked seat is a contract. A client is a client. We are not in the business of judgment, she said, her voice rising slightly with passion. We do not get to decide who is more valuable, who is more important, who has certain expectations that override the basic agreement we make with every person who steps onto our aircraft. Your job is not to manage a hierarchy. Your job is to provide flawless, discreet, and equal service to every single person in that cabin. The moment you look at two clients and see anything other than two clients, you have failed. You have introduced bias, and bias is a poison to this company. She then did something unexpected. She played a short, edited clip of the audio. Not the whole thing, just the key moments. The room heard the young attendant's voice saying, "Another very valued client." They heard the lead attendant's smooth, dismissive tone. They heard Mike Tyson's calm, clear question. "You want me to get out of the seat I booked?" For him, hearing it was different from just hearing about it. The condescension in the crew's voices was palpable. The room winced as one. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "That," the head of operations said, switching the audio off, "is the sound of a career ending. That is the sound of someone forgetting what we are here to do. We are here to serve, not to sort." For the next hour, she led a raw, honest discussion. They talked about unconscious bias. They talked about the pressure from demanding clients and how to handle it without compromising other passengers. They role-played scenarios. The training was no longer about which wine to pair with the meal. It was about the ethics of service. Every employee in that room left changed. The firings were not seen as a distant punishment for someone else's mistake. They were a stark, terrifying lesson in the absolute standards they were now expected to uphold. The message was clean and simple. Asterisk, this is the line. Cross it, and you are gone. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The other passenger, the man in the suit, also felt the repercussions, though in a quieter way. A senior partner from his investment firm received a courteous but firm call from the jet service's head of client relations. The conversation was diplomatic, but the message was clear. The conduct of their employee on the flight had been noted and was at odds with the behavioral standards expected of clients in such a private, shared environment. There was no ban, no fine, just a subtle professional notation. In his world, reputation was everything. The faintest stain of being labeled difficult or causing problems in the rarefied air of private travel was a serious thing. He never spoke of the incident, but he was markedly more polite to service staff from that day forward as for the fired crew members. Their lives took hard turns. The lead attendant, with 20 years of specialized experience, found the doors of every other major private aviation company mysteriously closed to him. The industry was small. Word traveled fast. He was not just a man who made a mistake. He was a man who had violated a sacred trust. He eventually took a job in logistics management for a cargo airline. His salary, a fraction of what it once was. The spacious house was sold. The private school for his daughter was no longer an option. On bad nights, he would hear the owner's furious voice on the phone, and he would remember the calm, empty eyes of Mike Tyson nodding at him in the doorway. The memory was a ghost he could not escape. The young attendant, Chloe, was not fired after her suspension. Her record before the incident was spotless, and she was seen as a follower, not an instigator. But she chose to resign. The shame was too heavy. The uniform felt like a lie. She left the aviation industry altogether and went back to school, studying counseling. She wanted to understand people better, and she wanted to understand her own actions that night. The journey was harder, but it was hers. A few months later, Mike Tyson had to fly again for business. His team arranged the travel. The jet service he had flown with before was by far the most convenient and efficient. There was a moment of hesitation, a silent question. Then Mike said, "Book it." When he boarded the aircraft, a different crew greeted him. Their professionalism was impeccable, but there was something else there. A depth of respect that went beyond knowing who he was. It was a respect for his space, his peace, his right to be there. The flight was utterly uneventful, perfectly smooth. It was exactly what a private flight should be. As he disembarked, the crew lead, a woman with calm eyes, said, "Thank you, Mr. Tyson. It was an honor to have you with us." He nodded. "Thank you." It was just a normal exchange. But it felt correct. The balance had been restored. The story of that one flight became a quiet legend, a foundational myth within the company. New hires heard about it in their ethics training. It was never about the celebrity. It was always about the seat, the contract, and the simple, powerful idea that respect is not a commodity to be graded and portioned out. It is a right, and it must be given freely and equally to everyone. The lesson was written not in a press release, but in the silent, reformed atmosphere of a cabin at 40,000 feet, where every passenger could finally just be a passenger.